The desert wind carried sand and silence across Camp Coronado's training annex as the first gray light of dawn crept over the eastern mountains. Lieutenant Commander Wren Holiday stepped out of the transport vehicle and adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses against the grit in the air. She carried a clipboard in her left hand and a leather satchel over her shoulder, and she looked exactly like what everyone expected a Navy Supply Corps officer to look like. Unremarkable, invisible, forgettable. She preferred it that way. The compound stretched before her in the pale morning light, a collection of low buildings and firing ranges carved into the California high desert. This was where Naval Special Warfare sent its elite operators to train with experimental weapons systems, far from prying eyes and official oversight. Wren was here for a routine quarterly audit, nothing more. Ammunition expenditure reports had shown discrepancies, and someone had to reconcile the numbers. That someone was always her. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. Maybe you have been in a situation where people looked right through you, where they assumed they knew everything about you based on your job title or appearance. If so, this story might feel familiar. Wren walked toward the supply building, her boots crunching on gravel. A group of men in tactical gear ran past her on the road, their breathing synchronized, their bodies moving with the precision of machines built for violence. None of them looked at her. She was a ghost passing through their world, and ghosts did not warrant acknowledgement. The irony of that word was not lost on her. Senior Chief Petty Officer Colt Brannigan led the formation, his voice carrying across the morning stillness as he called cadence. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a jaw that looked carved from the same stone as the surrounding mountains. When he noticed Wren walking parallel to his formation, he did not slow his pace, but his voice grew louder. "Why do they let bean counters on operational training grounds?" he called out, and his men laughed in rhythm with their running steps. Someone ought to tell command that pencil pushers make for poor camouflage. More laughter. Wren kept walking. Her expression did not change. She had learned long ago that reaction was a form of surrender, and she had never been the surrendering type. The supply building was a squat concrete structure that smelled of diesel and cardboard. Wren signed in with the duty officer, a young petty officer third class who barely glanced at her credentials before waving her through. She found her designated workspace in a back office filled with filing cabinets and outdated computers, and she began her work. Numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. The ammunition log showed a pattern that did not match the official training schedules. Someone was burning through thousands of rounds off the books. Someone was practicing in secret, and that someone was failing badly enough to need the extra attempts. Wren made notes on her clipboard. She would need to visit the armory. She would need to inspect the ranges. She would need to spend more time among people who wish she did not exist. Through the small window of her office, she could see the primary firing range where Brannigan and his sniper cadre had finished their run and were now gathering around a long table covered with rifle cases. Their voices drifted through the glass, muffled but audible. "This piece of garbage is going to end my career," Brannigan said, and there was genuine frustration beneath his bravado. "The XM-2047 was supposed to make us superhuman. Instead, it makes us look like recruits who cannot hit the broadside of a carrier." Wren watched him lift the experimental rifle from its case. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the weapon like he was trying to strangle it into submission. He was fighting it. They all were. She turned back to her spreadsheets and tried not to think about her father. Gunnery Sergeant Tobias Holiday had been dead for 6 years now, but his voice still lived in her memory. "The rifle does not make the shot," he used to say. "You do. Trust yourself first, then trust your equipment. Never the other way around." She had not fired a weapon since his funeral. She had built an entire career around avoiding anything that might remind her of who she used to be, of what she could still do if she allowed herself. The Navy saw Lieutenant Commander Wren Holiday, logistics officer, paper pusher, clipboard carrier. That was enough. That had to be enough. Outside, Brannigan racked around and settled into his firing position. The crack of the rifle echoed across the desert. followed by a curse that needed no translation. Rin made another note on her clipboard and kept her secrets buried where they belonged. The ammunition discrepancy was worse than the initial reports suggested. Rin spent the morning cross-referencing requisition forms with range logs, and the numbers refused to align. Someone had drawn nearly 12,000 additional rounds over the past 2 months, rounds that appeared nowhere in the official training records. The pattern pointed toward unauthorized night sessions, desperate practice hidden from oversight and accountability. She needed to see the armory in person. The walk across the compound took her past the secondary range where a group of younger operators were running drills with standard-issue rifles. They moved with fluid precision, their bodies extensions of their weapons, and Rin found herself analyzing their form without meaning to. Trigger discipline was solid. Breathing patterns were inconsistent. 2 of them were anticipating recoil, jerking slightly before each shot. She caught herself and looked away. That part of her life was over. The armory was a reinforced building near the center of the compound, staffed by Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Lindquist. He was a compact man with clever hands and the permanently frustrated expression of someone whose equipment was being blamed for operator error. When Rin presented her credentials and explained her audit requirements, he actually seemed relieved. Finally, someone who understands paperwork, he said, pulling out binders of maintenance logs. These guys think rifles fix themselves. They think ammunition grows on trees. They think I am the problem because the XM2047 is not performing the way the brochure promised. Rin flipped through the logs with practiced efficiency. Tell me about the rifle, she said, keeping her voice neutral. What is causing the qualification failures? Lindquist laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nothing is wrong with the rifle. The XM2047 is the most advanced precision weapon system ever developed. AI-assisted targeting, real-time environmental compensation, smart ammunition that adjusts trajectory mid-flight. It should make a mediocre shooter good and a good shooter perfect. But it does not, Rin said. Because they will not let it, Lindquist replied. These operators have spent their entire careers trusting their instincts, making micro-adjustments based on feel and experience. The XM2047 requires partnership. It requires trust in the technology. They keep fighting it, overriding the AI corrections, second-guessing the system. The rifle tries to compensate for their compensation, and everything falls apart. Rin understood exactly what he meant. Biathlon had taught her the same lesson years ago. Heart rate monitors, wind calculators, the intimate dance between athlete and equipment. You could not fight your tools and expect to win. You had to merge with them. She thanked Lindquist and continued her inspection, documenting serial numbers and storage conditions while her mind wandered where she did not want it to go. The hallway connecting the armory to the main administrative building was narrow and poorly lit. Rin was reviewing her notes when a shoulder slammed into hers from behind, sending her clipboard clattering across the concrete floor. Papers scattered like startled birds. Senior Chief Brannigan stood over her, his expression carrying the thin mask of false apology. "Watch where you're going, clipboard," he said. "Some of us have actual work to do." Rin knelt and began gathering her papers. She did not respond. She did not look up. Brannigan seemed irritated by her composure. He wanted a reaction, something he could use to justify his contempt. When she offered nothing, he pushed harder. "You know what we call supply officers on the teams?" he asked. "Ghosts. Because you drift around taking notes, and nobody remembers you were ever here. Just ghosts who do not matter." Something flickered behind Rin's eyes at that word. Ghost. Her father's call sign. The name that had followed him through 3 wars and made him a legend among those who understood what precision and patience could accomplish. Brannigan had no idea what he had just invoked. She stood with her papers reorganized, her clipboard once again in hand. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "I will need access to the range usage log for the past 60 days, she said. "There are discrepancies that require explanation." Brannigan's face reddened. He was not accustomed to being dismissed, to having his intimidation met with bureaucratic indifference. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a deeper voice from behind him. "Senior Chief, Master Chief Render would like a word about tomorrow's qualification schedule. Brannigan shot one last look at Wren before stalking away. The man who had spoken remained. He was older than Brannigan, with silver threading through his close-cropped hair and eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. Master Chief Petty Officer Josiah Render studied Wren with an expression she could not quite read. "Holiday," he said, and it was not a question. "That is an interesting name." "Common enough," Wren replied. Render nodded slowly. "I served with a Holiday once. Golfa, Marine Corps Scout Sniper. They called him Ghost." Wren met his gaze without flinching. "Like I said, common name." She walked away before he could respond, but she felt his eyes on her back the entire length of the hallway. He knew, or at least he suspected. The question was whether he would say anything, and what it would mean if he did. That night, alone in her temporary quarters, Wren stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant crack of rifle fire from the range. Someone was practicing after hours, burning through ammunition that would never appear in any official log. She knew without asking that it was Brannigan, desperately trying to master a weapon that required him to become something he did not know how to be. She could help him. She could walk onto that range and show him exactly what he was doing wrong, how to breathe with the rifle instead of against it, how to trust the partnership between human instinct and machine precision. She did not move. Some ghosts were better left buried. Morning brought heat and tension in equal measure. The qualification course was set up on the primary range, a gauntlet of precision that would test every skill these elite snipers had spent their careers developing. Targets stood at 800, 1,200, 1,500, and 2,000 meters, each one smaller than the last, each one demanding perfection under conditions designed to break concentration. Wren positioned herself near the range control building, clipboard in hand, officially documenting ammunition expenditure for her audit. No one questioned her presence. No one cared enough to ask why a supply officer needed to witness qualification attempts firsthand. She was furniture, background noise, exactly what she wanted to be. Lieutenant Commander Drake Eastwick stood at the center of the assembled team, his jaw tight with pressure he was trying not to show. Command had made their expectations clear. The XM-2047 program represented billions in development costs and the future of precision warfare. If his team could not qualify, the contract would go elsewhere and careers would end. His career, Brannigan's career. Everyone standing on this range had something to lose. Eastwick addressed his snipers with the clipped efficiency of a man who had run out of inspirational words. "You know what is at stake," he said. "You know what this rifle can do. Today we prove that we are worthy of it." Brannigan stepped forward first, shouldering the XM-2047 with the confidence of a man who had never publicly failed at anything in his life. The rifle was a marvel of engineering, all sleek lines and integrated electronics, a weapon that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film rather than the California desert. He settled into his firing position and let out a long breath. The first target sat at 800 meters, a distance these men could normally hit in their sleep. Brannigan adjusted his grip, felt the rifle's AI system hum to life against his cheek, and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide by nearly a foot. Cursing under his breath, Brannigan adjusted and fired again. Closer, but still outside acceptable parameters. His third shot clipped the edge of the target, enough to register but not enough to qualify. By the time he finished the 800-meter string, his score was barely passing. 1,200 meters broke him. The AI system fed corrections to his scope, adjusting for wind and elevation and the curve of the Earth itself, but Brannigan kept overriding its suggestions. He trusted his instincts more than the machine, and his instincts were calibrated for a different weapon. Each shot compounded his errors. Each miss tightened the knot of frustration in his shoulders. Wren watched without expression, but inside she was cataloging every mistake. He was breathing wrong, holding tension in his neck that transferred through his arms to the rifle. He was fighting the AI instead of flowing with it, creating a feedback loop of overcorrection that made accuracy impossible. She had seen this before in biathlon competitors who could not adapt to new equipment, athletes who let ego override efficiency. The 1,500-meter target might as well have been on the moon. Brannigan missed every shot, his composure crumbling with each trigger pull. When he finally stepped back from the firing line, his face was the color of raw meat and his hands were shaking. Next, Eastwick called, and his voice carried no comfort. One by one, the team snipers took their positions. One by one, they failed. Petty Officer Tanaka came closest, his youth perhaps making him more adaptable to the new technology, but even he could not crack the 1,500-meter barrier. The AI system worked flawlessly, feeding perfect data to shooters who could not bring themselves to trust it. By noon, the range had fallen silent. 8 operators had attempted qualification. 8 operators had failed. The XM-2047 rifles sat in their cases like accusations, perfect weapons betrayed by imperfect faith. Eastwick received a call on his satellite phone and stepped away from the group to answer it. Wren did not need to hear the conversation to read its content in the progressive slumping of his shoulders. Command was not pleased. Deadline pressure was intensifying. The window for success was closing. Brannigan gathered his team near the equipment table, his voice low and venomous. "This is not our failure," he said. "This rifle is defective. The AI is flawed. We have been set up to fail by engineers who have never fired a shot in combat." Lindquist stepped forward, defensive anger flashing in his eyes. "The rifle is performing exactly as designed," he said. "The problem is not the equipment." "Then what is the problem?" Brannigan demanded. Lindquist hesitated, glancing around at the assembled operators. He knew what he wanted to say. He knew it would not be received well. "The problem," he said carefully, "is trust. The XM-2047 requires a partnership between shooter and system. You cannot fight it and expect to win." Brannigan's response was a string of words that would have made a sailor blush, which was appropriate given the company. Lindquist retreated to his armory, and the team dispersed in a cloud of frustration and bruised pride. Wren made a note on her clipboard. Ammunition expended, accuracy percentages, qualification failures documented. Just another day of invisible work in an invisible career. But her hands remembered what her mind tried to forget. Her fingers could still feel the weight of a rifle, the rhythm of breath and trigger, the meditation of the perfect shot. She had been trained by the best who ever lived, and that training did not disappear simply because she wished it would. The desert wind picked up, carrying sand across the empty range. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled against the pale sky, patient and precise, waiting for the moment to strike. Wren gathered her papers and walked back toward the supply building, leaving the failures behind her. The discrepancy in the ammunition logs led Wren to the night range 3 hours after sunset. She had cross-referenced requisition timestamps with facility access records, and the pattern was undeniable. Someone had been drawing rounds between 2200 and 0200 hours, long after official training concluded. The quantities were staggering. Thousands of rounds vanishing into the darkness without official documentation. She moved quietly through the compound, her footsteps soft on the gravel paths. The desert cold had settled in with the sun's departure, and she pulled her jacket tighter against the chill. Ahead, the night range glowed under harsh floodlights, an island of artificial day in the surrounding blackness. Brannigan was alone on the firing line. Wren positioned herself in the shadows near the range control building, watching through the window as the senior chief burned through magazine after magazine. His form was textbook, his discipline evident in every controlled movement. This was not a man who lacked skill. This was a man whose skill had become his enemy. She watched him fight the XM-2047 for nearly an hour. Each shot followed the same pattern. He would settle into position, let the AI feed him corrections, then override those corrections with his own adjustments at the last moment. The rifle would try to compensate for his compensation, and the shot would drift wide. It was like watching two dancers who refused to let the other lead, stumbling through a performance that should have been graceful. He was anticipating the technology instead of trusting it. His instincts, honed over 15 years of combat shooting, were telling him lies about what the rifle needed. The AI was not his enemy. His own expertise was. Ren understood this intimately. Biathlon had taught her the same lesson in a different context. When she had first started using electronic wind gauges and heart rate monitors, she had fought them constantly. Her father had been the one to set her straight. The instrument does not care about your ego, Tobias Holliday had told her during a freezing training session in Alaska. It only knows the truth. Your job is to listen. She had listened. She had learned to merge her instincts with the technology, to create a partnership where human intuition and mechanical precision became one unified system. It had made her one of the best biathlon shooters in collegiate history. Brannigan fired another string. Another failure. He slammed his palm against the shooting bench and let out a sound that was more animal than human. Ren could walk out there right now. She could show him exactly what he was doing wrong, demonstrate the breathing patterns and mental frameworks that would unlock the rifle's potential. She could save his career with 15 minutes of instruction. She remained in the shadows. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The sound of boots on gravel made her turn. Master Chief Render emerged from the darkness, his approach deliberate enough that she knew he had seen her watching. He stopped beside her and looked through the window at Brannigan's continued struggles. "He has been out here every night for 3 weeks," Render said quietly, "burning through enough ammunition to equip a small army. Command does not know. I have been covering for him." Ren said nothing. Render continued as if her silence was response enough. "I made some calls after our conversation yesterday. Talked to some old contacts in the Marine Corps. Gunnery Sergeant Tobias Holliday. 147 confirmed kills across 3 conflicts. They called him Ghost because targets never saw him, never heard him, never knew death was coming until it arrived." The wind picked up, carrying sand across the empty training grounds. Ren watched Brannigan fire another failed shot. "He had a daughter," Render said. "Trained her from the time she could hold a rifle. Word was she could outshoot him by the time she was 17. Then she disappeared from that world entirely. Joined the Navy, but never touched a weapon professionally. Some people thought it was a waste. Others thought she was running from something." Ren finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe she just wanted to be her own person." Render nodded slowly. "Maybe she did, but some gifts do not care what we want. They stay with us whether we use them or not." He turned to look at her directly. In the harsh light spilling from the range, his eyes held something like understanding. "I am not going to tell anyone," he said. "That is your choice to make. But these men are about to lose everything because they cannot master a weapon that is beyond their current understanding. And somewhere out, there is a woman who could teach them what they need to know." He walked away without waiting for a response, his footsteps fading into the desert night. Ren remained at the window, watching Brannigan fail again and again. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, blending with the crack of rifle fire and the whisper of wind through the darkness. "The rifle does not make the shot. You do." She had spent 12 years building a life that did not include shooting. 12 years proving that she was more than Tobias Holliday's daughter. 12 years convincing herself that the skills burned into her muscle memory could simply be ignored. Brannigan fired one last shot, missed by a margin that would have embarrassed a recruit, and finally lowered the rifle in defeat. His shoulders sagged. His head dropped. In that moment, stripped of his arrogance and bravado, he looked like nothing more than a man watching his world collapse. Ren turned away from the window and walked back to her quarters through the cold desert night. She did not sleep. 2 days remained before the final qualification deadline. The compound had taken on the atmosphere of a funeral procession, operators moving through their duties with the grim resignation of men awaiting execution. Ren continued her audit with methodical precision, documenting every discrepancy while the world around her crumbled. She was reviewing inventory manifests in the supply building when Lindquist appeared in her doorway. His expression caught somewhere between frustration and despair. "You understand these systems," he said without preamble. "I have watched you examine the equipment logs. You ask questions that show you know what you're looking at." Ren kept her eyes on her paperwork. "I understand supply chain management and documentation requirements." Lindquist stepped into the office and lowered his voice. "I'm not talking about paperwork. I'm talking about the XM 2047. The way you looked at the technical specifications yesterday. The questions you asked about the AI integration protocols. That was not a logistics officer checking serial numbers. She finally looked up, her expression carefully neutral. What exactly are you suggesting, petty officer? He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they were alone. I am suggesting that I have been trying to explain to these operators for weeks what they're doing wrong, and none of them will listen. They think because I am an armorer and not a shooter that I do not understand. But the problem is not complicated. The problem is ego. Ren set down her pen. Go on. The XM-2047 is designed to be a partnership, Lindquist continued, his words coming faster now. The AI handles environmental variables, calculates adjustments, feeds optimal solutions to the shooter. All the operator has to do is trust the system and execute. But these men have spent their entire careers relying on instinct. They cannot let go of control. They override the AI at the critical moment, and everything falls apart. Ren understood the problem with perfect clarity. It was the same challenge she had faced in biathlon, the same lesson her father had drilled into her during countless hours of training. Technology was not the enemy of human skill. It was an amplifier. But amplification required surrender, and surrender required trust. What would you need? She asked carefully to help him understand. Lindquist laughed bitterly. A demonstration. Someone who could show them what partnership with the system looks like. Someone who could prove that the rifle works when the shooter stops fighting it. And where would you find someone like that? He met her eyes with an intensity that suggested he already suspected the answer. I have no idea, he said. But if such a person existed and was willing to step forward, they could save a lot of careers. Maybe even change how the Navy thinks about precision warfare. He left without waiting for a response, and Ren sat alone with the weight of his words pressing down on her shoulders. The afternoon brought another failed practice session on the primary range. Ren observed from her usual position near the control building, watching Tanaka attempt to implement some of Lindquist's suggestions. The young petty officer was trying, genuinely trying, to trust the AI system. But years of training worked against him. At the crucial moment, instinct overrode intention, and his shots drifted wide. He was the closest any of them had come to understanding. He was still not close enough. Eastwick received another call from command during the session. This time he did not try to hide his reaction. His face went pale, and when he ended the call, his hands were trembling slightly. The message was clear without being spoken. Failure was no longer an abstract concept. It was an approaching deadline with consequences that would reshape careers and lives. Brannigan responded to the pressure by becoming more aggressive. His mockery of Ren intensified, as if her presence had become a symbol of everything wrong with his situation. He made comments about paper pushers and desk warriors within her hearing. He wondered loudly why command sent auditors to document failure instead of solutions to prevent it. Ren absorbed it all without visible reaction. She had learned long ago that bullies fed on response, that silence was a form of armor they could not penetrate. But inside, something was shifting. The wall she had built between her past and present was developing cracks. That evening, Tanaka found her alone in the mess hall, picking at a meal she had no appetite for. He sat across from her without asking permission, his young face earnest and troubled. I wanted to apologize, he said, for the way the senior chief has been treating you. It is not right. Ren studied him for a moment. You do not need to apologize for someone else's behavior. Maybe not, Tanaka admitted, but someone should acknowledge that it is wrong. You are here doing your job, same as us. You do not deserve to be treated like an enemy. She almost smiled. That level of emotional intelligence was rare in environments dominated by testosterone and competition. Almost does not count in this business, she said. Neither does deserve. Tanaka leaned forward. Can I ask you something personal? Ren hesitated, then nodded. Your glasses, he said. They are not prescription. I noticed when the light hit them at a certain angle. The lenses are flat. You wear them because you want people to see you a certain way. The observation was more perceptive than she had expected. She removed the glasses and looked at them, turning them over in her hands. Sometimes, she said quietly, The person people expect you to be is easier than the person you actually are. Tanaka considered this. Who are you actually, Lieutenant Commander? Rin put the glasses back on and stood to leave. Just a logistics officer, she said. Nothing more. But as she walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, and she knew that her answer had convinced neither of them. The compound fell silent after midnight, the desert cold settling over the buildings like a burial shroud. Rin lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come despite the exhaustion that weighed on her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face. Every time silence stretched too long, she heard his voice. She finally surrendered to restlessness and walked out into the night. The stars above the desert were overwhelming, a river of light unmarred by civilization's glow. Rin walked without destination, letting her feet carry her through the darkness until she found herself standing at the primary range. The firing benches were empty. The targets stood like sentinels in the distance, waiting for shooters who could not reach them. The XM-2047 lay in its case on the equipment table, left out for tomorrow's final practice session. Rin approached it slowly, her heart beating faster with each step. She had not touched a precision rifle in 6 years. She had built her entire identity around that absence. She opened the case. The weapon gleamed under the starlight, all elegant lines and integrated technology. It was nothing like the rifles her father had trained her on, yet somehow it felt familiar. The weight of it, the balance, the promise of what it could do in capable hands. These things transcended specific models and manufacturers. These things were universal. She did not pick it up. She stood over it, looking down at the instrument that was destroying careers and reputations, and she understood with perfect clarity why these elite operators could not master it. They saw the AI as competition. They saw the technology as a threat to their expertise. They could not grasp that the rifle was offering partnership, not replacement. You should try it. Rin turned to find Master Chief Render emerging from the shadows. He moved quietly for a man his size, his approach deliberate and unhurried. He stopped a few feet away and looked at the rifle, then at her. No one would know, he continued. Middle of the night. No witnesses. Just you and the weapon and the truth. I'm not a shooter, Rin said, the words automatic and hollow. Render shook his head slowly. I knew your father. Not well, but enough. I watched him make a shot once that should have been impossible. 1,800 meters in a crosswind that would have challenged a computer. He made it look easy, and afterward when someone asked him how, he said his daughter could have done it better. Rin felt something twist in her chest. He talked about me, constantly, to anyone who would listen. He said you had a gift that came along once in a generation. He said watching you shoot was like watching music made visible. He said you could have been the greatest precision shooter the military had ever produced. Her eyes stung, but she refused to let the tears fall. Then why did I walk away? Render was quiet for a moment. I cannot answer that, he said. Only you know what you were running from. But I can tell you this. Whatever you were trying to prove by hiding, you have proven it. 12 years in the Navy. Exemplary service record. Respect earned on your own terms. You are not Tobias Holliday's shadow. You never were. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. She had spent so long fighting her father's legacy that she had never stopped to consider whether the fight was still necessary. She had become Lieutenant Commander Ren Holliday, supply officer. She had built something real and valuable. And maybe, just maybe, that identity was strong enough to survive the addition of who she used to be. What happened to him was not your fault, Render said quietly. You know that. Ren closed her eyes. Her father had died of pancreatic cancer, wasting away in a VA hospital while she sat beside him and held his hand. In his final weeks, delirious with pain and medication, he had called her his greatest achievement. Not his kill count, not his medals. Her. And she had spent the years since his death running from everything that connected her to him. I know, she whispered, but knowing and feeling are different things. Render nodded. They are. But at some point, you have to stop punishing yourself for being exceptional. Your father gave you a gift. Refusing to use it does not honor his memory. It just means the gift dies with you. He turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving her alone with the rifle and the stars and the echo of truth she had spent years avoiding. Ren stood at the firing line for a long time. She did not touch the weapon. She did not need to. She could feel its potential humming in the air between them, the promise of what they could accomplish together. The AI system was not her enemy. The technology was not a betrayal of her father's teaching. It was an evolution, an opportunity to merge everything he had given her with everything the modern world had to offer. She closed the rifle case and walked back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring the final practice session before qualification. Tomorrow would bring another round of failures and frustration and careers sliding toward destruction. Tomorrow would bring a choice she was not yet ready to make. But for the first time in 12 years, she was considering making it. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Her mother answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep and concern. "Mom," Ren said, "tell me about Dad's last rifle. The one you kept." There was a long pause. Then her mother's voice, soft and knowing. "I wondered when you would finally ask." The final practice session began under a sky the color of bruised copper. Wind had picked up overnight, gusting across the range in unpredictable patterns that sent sand spiraling between the firing positions. Conditions were brutal. Conditions were perfect for proving that the XM2047 could compensate for environmental variables that would defeat any conventional rifle. If only someone could demonstrate that truth. Ren arrived at the range with her clipboard and her carefully constructed invisibility, positioning herself near the control building as she had done every day of her audit. But something had changed overnight. The wall between who she was and who she had been felt thinner, more permeable. The conversation with her mother had lasted 3 hours, traveling through memories and grief, and finally arriving at something that felt like permission. "Your father never wanted you to be him," her mother had said. "He wanted you to be the best version of yourself. And if that version includes shooting, then shoot. If it does not, then do not. But make sure you are choosing, not hiding." Ren had not slept after that call. She had lain awake wrestling with questions she had spent 12 years avoiding. Now she stood in the morning heat, watching elite operators prepare for another round of failure, and she felt the weight of choice pressing down on her shoulders. Brannigan took the first position, his jaw set with desperate determination. Yesterday's failures had stripped away his arrogance, leaving something rawer and more dangerous in its place. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made him unpredictable. His first shot, at 800 meters, missed by inches. His second grazed the edge of the target. His third finally found center mass, but the pattern was inconsistent, unreliable. By the time he reached the 1,200-meter target, his groupings had fallen apart entirely. The wind was too variable, his trust in the AI too fragile. When he stepped back from the line, his face was a mask of controlled rage. Eastwick called the next shooter, and the pattern repeated. Failure after failure, careers crumbling in real time. The XM2047 performed flawlessly, feeding perfect data to operators who could not bring themselves to believe it. Ren watched and calculated. She noted wind patterns, observed heat shimmer rising from the desert floor, tracked the subtle environmental shifts that the AI was compensating for with each passing moment. The rifle was doing its job. The shooters were not doing theirs. During a break in the rotation, Brannigan stalked toward the equipment table where Lindquist was adjusting scope calibrations. His voice carried across the range, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This weapon is garbage," he declared. "The AI is fighting me on every shot. The engineers who designed this system have never fired a rifle in combat conditions." Lindquist looked up, his patience finally cracking. "The weapon is not the problem, Senior Chief. I have explained this repeatedly. The AI is designed to assist, not replace. You have to trust the partnership." "Trust," Brannigan spat. "You want me to trust a computer over 15 years of combat experience? You want me to surrender my instincts to a machine? I want you to stop fighting long enough to let the system help you." Brannigan leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You are an armorer. You fix weapons. You do not tell operators how to shoot. Know your place. He turned away before Lindquist could respond, and his eyes fell on Wren. Something ugly flickered across his face, frustration and humiliation seeking an outlet. "And what are you still doing here, clipboard?" he demanded, loud enough to draw every eye on the range. "Your audit should have been finished days ago. Are you enjoying watching us fail? Is that what logistics officers do for entertainment?" Wren met his gaze without flinching. "I am documenting ammunition expenditure as required by my orders." Brannigan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You know what I think? I think you're a spy. I think Command sent you here to document our failure so they can justify shutting down this entire program. I think you're here to bury us." The accusation was absurd, but the venom behind it was real. Brannigan was looking for someone to blame, someone to punish for his own inadequacy. Wren had been an easy target from the beginning, and now she was becoming the focus of all his impotent rage. She said nothing. She had learned long ago that engagement only fed the fire. Brannigan reached out and snatched the clipboard from her hands. He looked at her notes, her careful documentation of every shot fired and every target missed. Then he threw the clipboard across the range, papers scattering in the wind like startled birds. "Get out," he said. "Get off my range. Get out of my compound. Go back to your desk and your spreadsheets, and leave the real work to people who actually matter." The silence that followed was absolute. Every operator on the range had stopped to watch. Lindquist stood frozen by the equipment table. Even Eastwick seemed paralyzed, unwilling to intervene despite the obvious breach of professional conduct. Wren looked at her scattered papers, then back at Brannigan. Something had shifted behind her eyes. The careful neutrality was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. She did not speak. She did not react. She simply turned and walked away, leaving her papers to blow across the desert sand. But as she walked, her hands were steady and her breathing was calm. And somewhere deep inside, a decision was taking shape. Qualification day arrived with the weight of a death sentence. The sun rose blood red over the mountains, casting long shadows across the compound as personnel moved through morning routines with the hushed efficiency of mourners preparing for a funeral. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew what would be lost. Captain Roxanne Verity's helicopter touched down at 0700. The rotor wash, sending clouds of dust billowing across the landing zone. She emerged with the bearing of someone who had spent 3 decades commanding respect without ever having to demand it. Her uniform was immaculate, her silver hair cropped close to her skull, her eyes carrying the weight of every difficult decision she had ever made. She was a legend within naval special warfare, a pioneer who had broken barriers and shattered expectations throughout her career. More importantly for the events about to unfold, she had known Tobias Holliday personally. She had been present when Ghost earned his name. Eastwick met her on the tarmac with a salute that could not quite hide his despair. "Captain," he said, "thank you for coming." Verity returned the salute crisply. "I wish the circumstances were different, Commander. Walk me through the situation." They moved toward the primary range, Eastwick briefing her on the qualification failures, the technical challenges, the pressure from command that had been building for weeks. Verity listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. The team assembled at 0800, every sniper present and accounted for. The XM-2047 rifles waited in their cases, silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold. Brannigan stood at the front of the formation, his face a mask of grim determination that could not quite conceal the fear beneath. Wren observed from a distance, standing near the supply building where she had spent the past week being invisible. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She had spent the night sitting in darkness, wrestling with ghosts both literal and metaphorical. Her clipboard was gone, scattered across the desert by Brannigan's tantrum. She had not retrieved the papers. She had not filed a complaint about his behavior. She had simply waited, letting the decision inside her grow until it filled every corner of her being. Now she watched Captain Verity address the assembled operators, her voice carrying across the still morning air. "Gentlemen," Verity said, I will not insult you with false encouragement. You know what is at stake. You know what failure means. The XM 2047 program represents the future of precision warfare, and today we determine whether that future includes this team. She paused, her eyes moving across the faces before her. Some of you have served under my command. Some of you I know only by reputation. All of you have proven yourselves in combat, earned your place among the elite. That history is why I am here personally. That history is why I wanted to witness whatever happens today. The qualification course was set up exactly as it had been during every failed practice session. Targets at 800, 1200, 1500, and 2000 meters. Variable wind conditions. Multiple shooting positions. The same gauntlet that had broken the team's confidence again and again. Brannigan stepped forward first. Pride would not allow him to do otherwise. He was the senior sniper, the team's instructor, the man whose reputation was most thoroughly on the line. If anyone could pull a miracle from the wreckage of the past weeks, it had to be him. He settled into his firing position with the ceremony of a man performing his own execution. The XM 2047 hummed to life against his cheek, AI systems engaging, environmental data flowing. He breathed deep. He squeezed the trigger. The shot at 800 meters found its mark. Cinemass. A murmur of hope rippled through the assembled observers. 1200 meters. Another hit, though slightly off-center. Still within parameters. Still qualifying. 1500 meters. The wind shifted as Brannigan fired, a gust that the AI had predicted and compensated for. But Brannigan had overridden the correction at the last moment, trusting his instincts over the machine. The shot went wide by 3 inches. Outside qualifying parameters. He tried again. Missed again. The pattern reasserted itself. Instinct fighting technology, ego battling partnership. By the time he reached the 2,000-meter target, his hands were shaking and his shots were scattered across the hillside like desperate prayers. He stepped back from the firing line, and no one needed to announce what the scoreboard already showed. Failure. One by one, the remaining snipers took their positions. One by one, they fell short. Tanaka came closest, his youth and adaptability bringing him within striking distance of qualification, but even he could not crack the 1,500-meter barrier under competition conditions. By 1000 hours, it was over. 8 operators had attempted qualification. 8 operators had failed. The XM 2047 program was effectively dead, and careers would follow. Captain Verity reviewed the scores in silence, her face unreadable. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present, a collective grief for what had been lost and what would never be. She looked up from the score sheets. Before I file my report, she said, "Is there anyone else who wishes to attempt qualification?" The question hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. No one spoke. What was the point? The team's best shooters had given everything they had. There was no one left. Then, from the edge of the range, a voice spoke. "I would like to try." Every head turned toward the supply building where Lieutenant Commander Wren Holiday stood in the morning light, her wire-rimmed glasses glinting in the sun. Brannigan's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Absolutely not," he said. "This is a joke. A logistics officer shooting a weapon that actual operators cannot master. Remove her from the range." But Captain Verity was not laughing. She was staring at Wren with an expression of dawning recognition, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place behind her eyes. "Holiday," she said slowly. "Your father was Tobias Holiday. They called him Ghost." Wren removed her glasses and met the captain's gaze without flinching. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "He was." The silence that followed Wren's admission stretched across the range like a hell breath. Every operator stood frozen, processing what they had just heard. The logistics officer with a clipboard. The bean counter. The ghost who drifted through their compound, documenting their failures. She was the daughter of a legend. Brannigan recovered first, his disbelief hardening into contempt. "I do not care whose daughter she is," he said, stepping toward Captain Verity. "She is not an operator. She is not qualified to handle this weapon system. This is a mockery of everything we stand for." Verity held up a hand, silencing him without looking in his direction. Her eyes remained fixed on Ren, measuring, calculating. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, "when was the last time you fired a precision rifle?" "6 years ago," Ren replied. "The day before my father died. And before that. Every day of my life since I was 7 years old." Another murmur rippled through the assembled operators. Master Chief Render stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had kept secrets long enough. "Captain," he said, "I served with Gunnery Sergeant Holliday in the Gulf. I have known who she was since the second day she arrived. I have watched her observe every practice session, every qualification attempt. The way she tracks wind, the way she reads conditions, the way she analyzes each shooter's mistakes. She sees what we're doing wrong. She's always seen it." Brannigan's face reddened. "This is absurd. One old war story about her father does not make her shooter. She has spent 12 years pushing paper. Whatever skills she might have had are long gone." Ren turned to face him directly, and something in her posture had changed. The careful invisibility was gone. The deliberate smallness had evaporated. She stood straighter now, her shoulders back, her breathing slow and controlled. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. "Senior Chief," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the range, "I watched you shoot for 3 weeks. I watched you fight the AI on every single shot. You anticipate the corrections instead of trusting them. You override the system at the moment of trigger pull because your ego cannot accept partnership with a machine. You breathe wrong. You hold tension in your neck that transfers through your arms. You are the finest conventional marksman I have ever seen, and you are failing because you cannot let go of being the finest." Brannigan stared at her, his mouth working soundlessly. "The XM-2047 is not your enemy," Ren continued. "It is not trying to replace you. It is offering to make you better than you ever imagined possible. All you have to do is trust it. All any of you have to do is trust it." She turned back to Captain Verity. "I would like to demonstrate what the rifle can do when the shooter stops fighting," she said, "if you will permit it." Verity studied her for a long moment. The weight of the decision was evident in her expression. This was unprecedented. A supply officer attempting qualification on an experimental weapon system that had defeated the Navy's elite snipers. If Ren failed, it would be a humiliation that would follow her for the rest of her career. But if she succeeded, Verity nodded once. "Proceed, Lieutenant Commander." Lindquist moved quickly to the equipment table, pulling an XM-2047 from its case with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation. He had suspected from the beginning. He had hoped without allowing himself to believe. Now he was about to witness the truth. Ren approached the firing line with measured steps. She took the rifle from Lindquist and held it for a moment, feeling its weight, its balance. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The muscle memory of 10,000 hours of training rose to the surface like water finding its level. She asked Lindquist 3 questions about the AI integration protocols. Technical questions, precise questions, the kind of questions that revealed deep understanding of both the technology and the principles behind it. He answered each one, and with each answer his confidence grew. The operators watched in stunned silence as Ren settled into her firing position. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of countless repetitions, countless hours of drilling fundamentals until they became as natural as breathing. Brannigan watched with his arms crossed, his expression caught between hope and resentment. Part of him wanted her to fail to validate his belief that the rifle was the problem. But another part, the part that had spent 3 weeks failing in secret, desperately wanted someone to prove it was possible. Ren closed her eyes and breathed. In her mind, she was 7 years old again, lying in the grass beside her father while he taught her to read the wind. She was 12, making her first 1,000-meter shot while he watched with tears in his eyes. She was 17, outscoring him for the first time and seeing nothing but pride on his face. She was 22, holding his hand in the hospital while he told her she was his greatest achievement. She opened her eyes. The rifle hummed against her cheek, AI systems engaging, environmental data flowing. She did not fight it. She did not override it. She merged with it, letting the technology become an extension of her, well, rather than an obstacle to overcome. The 800-meter target waited in the distance. Rin breathed out slowly, let her heartbeat settle into rhythm, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle split the morning air, and time seemed to suspend itself as the round traveled downrange. 800 meters of desert air, wind currents, heat shimmer, and gravitational pull stood between the muzzle and the target. The impact was dead center. A murmur rippled through the assembled operators, surprise and disbelief mingling in equal measure. One shot meant nothing. One shot could be luck. But the way Rin had taken that shot, the stillness of her form, the absolute economy of her movement, suggested something far beyond fortune. She chambered another round without lifting her head from the stock. Her breathing remained steady, rhythmic, almost meditative. The AI fed her data about the 1,200-meter target, wind speed and direction, temperature gradients, the subtle curve of the Earth itself. She absorbed the information without resistance, letting it merge with her own instincts rather than fighting it. The second shot broke clean. 1,200 meters. Dead center. Tanaka stepped forward unconsciously, drawn toward the firing line as if pulled by invisible strings. He had never seen anyone shoot like this. The smoothness, the confidence, the absolute absence of hesitation or doubt. Rin adjusted her position for the 1,500-meter target. This was where every operator had failed. This was where instinct and technology had gone to war and technology had lost. The wind was gusting now, unpredictable patterns that would have defeated any conventional rifle and most shooters. She waited. The AI tracked the wind, calculating adjustments in real time, feeding solutions to her scope. She watched the data scroll across her vision, felt the rifle compensate for each shift in conditions. And instead of overriding those compensations, instead of letting her instincts tell her the machine was wrong, she trusted. The third shot traveled 1,500 meters through swirling wind and thermal distortion. Dead center. Brannigan made a sound that might have been a gasp or might have been a curse. His face had gone pale, the blood draining away as his worldview crumbled with each trigger pull. This was impossible. This was everything he had been told could not happen. A logistics officer, a woman who had not fired a weapon in 6 years, was doing what his entire team could not. Captain Verity watched with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to something approaching wonder. She had seen extraordinary shooting in her career. She had witnessed what human beings could accomplish when training met talent. But this was different. This was a demonstration of perfect partnership between shooter and weapon, a preview of what precision warfare could become. The 2,000-meter target waited at the edge of visibility, a speck against the distant hillside that seemed to mock the very concept of accuracy. Heat shimmer rose from the desert floor, creating waves of distortion that made the target dance and blur. The wind gusted from 3 different directions in the span of 10 seconds. Every operator who had attempted this shot had missed by margins measured in feet, not inches. The conditions were impossible. The distance was impossible. The shot itself was supposed to be impossible. Rin settled into her position with the patience of stone. She let her heartbeat slow until she could feel each individual pulse. She let her breathing become a metronome, steady and predictable. The AI processed thousands of data points per second, tracking every variable that could affect the trajectory, calculating adjustments in real time. She felt her father beside her in that moment, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a presence woven into the very fabric of her muscle memory. Every lesson he had taught her, every hour of training, every word of encouragement and correction, it was all still there, waiting to be used. The rifle does not make the shot, his voice whispered in her mind. You do. She squeezed the trigger. The round left the muzzle at over 2,000 feet per second, beginning its journey across 2 kilometers of hostile air. It climbed and fell and adjusted, the smart ammunition making micro-corrections based on real-time telemetry. The AI had calculated the solution. The rifle had executed the mechanics. But the shot itself, the decision to fire at exactly that moment, had been pure human intuition. The seconds stretched into eternity. Then the distant target shattered. Dead center. The range erupted. Tanaka let out a whoop that echoed off the surrounding hills. Lindquist pumped his fist in vindication. Even operators who had mocked Ren for days found themselves cheering, swept up in the sheer improbability of what they had witnessed. Captain Verity lowered her binoculars with an expression of profound satisfaction. For shots, she said. 4 center mass impacts at 800, 1200, 1500, and 2000 meters. In conditions that defeated every sniper on this range. Ren remained in her firing position, her cheeks still pressed against the stock. She was not finished. "Ma'am," she said without looking up, "I would like to run the course again." Verity raised an eyebrow. "You have already demonstrated qualification, Lieutenant Commander." "I know." Ren finally lifted her head and met the captain's eyes. "But I want them to understand that it was not luck. I want them to see what this weapon can do when you stop fighting it." She settled back into position. "Permission granted," Verity said, and Ren began to shoot. The second string was flawless. 800 meters, center. 1200 meters, center. 1500 meters, center. 2000 meters, center. Each shot landed with mechanical precision, the kind of accuracy that belonged in a laboratory rather than a windswept desert range. Ren did not pause between shots. She flowed through the course like water, finding its path downhill, each movement connected to the next in an unbroken chain of lethal grace. The operators watched in stunned silence, their cheers from the first string fading into something closer to reverence. She ran the course a third time. Perfect. A fourth time. Perfect. By the fifth string, even Captain Verity had stopped counting center mass impacts. The demonstration had transcended qualification. It had become something else entirely. A masterclass. A revelation. Proof that everything the developers had promised about the XM2047 was not only possible, but achievable. Ren finally lifted her head from the stock after the fifth 2,000-meter shot found its mark. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was moisture at the corners of her eyes that had nothing to do with the wind. She had not fired a rifle since the day before her father died. She had told herself she was honoring his memory by stepping away, by becoming her own person, by proving she was more than Ghost Holiday's prodigy daughter. But standing on this range, feeling the rifle settle against her shoulder like an old friend returning home, she understood the truth. She had not been honoring him. She had been running from the pain of losing him. And in running, she had abandoned the gift he had spent 20 years cultivating. No more. Lindquist was the first to approach her, his face split by a grin that threatened to crack his jaw. "I knew it," he said. "From the moment you started asking questions about the AI protocols, I knew you understood what everyone else was missing." Ren handed him the rifle with something approaching tenderness. "The weapon is extraordinary," she said. "Your engineers should be proud." Tanaka pushed through the crowd of operators, his eyes wide with an admiration that bordered on worship. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "how did you learn to shoot like that?" "I have trained for years and never come close to what you just did." "My father taught me," Ren replied, "from the time I could hold a rifle." But the real lesson was not about shooting. It was about trust. He used to say that the greatest enemy of accuracy is not wind or distance or conditions. It is ego, the belief that you know better than the evidence in front of you. She looked past Tanaka to where Brannigan stood alone at the edge of the group. His face was ashen, his posture collapsed. Everything he had believed about himself, about operators, about women in combat roles, had been demolished in the span of 20 minutes. "The rifle does not make the shot," Ren said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You do. But when you're offered a partner that can make you better, refusing that partnership is not strength. It is fear." Captain Verity stepped forward, and the crowd parted for her with instinctive respect. She stopped in front of Ren and studied her with eyes that had witnessed 40 years of naval history. "I knew your father," she said. "I was present at Kofji when he earned his name. I watched him make shots that should have been impossible, save lives that should have been lost. When he died, I thought his kind of excellence had died with him. She paused, her voice softening. I was wrong. Ren felt her throat tighten. He talked about you, she said. He said you were the finest officer he ever served under. Verity smiled, a rare expression that transformed her stern features. He talked about you more. Every chance he got. He said you would surpass him someday. He said you already had. The weight of those words settled over Ren like a benediction. For 12 years, she had carried the burden of her father's legacy, convinced that she could never live up to it, terrified of trying and failing. Now, she stood on a range surrounded by the Navy's elite, having demonstrated exactly what Ghost Holiday had always known she could do. She had not surpassed him. She had become the next chapter of story he had started. And that, she realized, was what he had wanted all along. Master Chief Render appeared at her elbow, his weathered face creased with something that might have been a smile. That was the finest shooting I have seen in 40 years of service, he said. Your father would have been proud. Ren nodded, not trusting her voice. Across the range, Brannigan had not moved. He stood frozen in place, watching the celebration unfold around the woman he had mocked and dismissed for an entire week. His career was saved. The XM 2047 program would continue. Everything he had feared losing was now secure. And all of it was because of her. Slowly, hesitantly, he began walking toward her. The crowd parted to let him through, sensing that something important was about to happen. Conversations faded. Movement stilled. I turned to watch the senior chief approach the logistics officer who had just humiliated him in front of his entire team. He stopped 2 feet away from Ren. His jaw worked silently, pride and shame and gratitude warring across his features. Teach me, he said finally. His voice cracked on the words. Please, teach me how to do what you just did. Ren looked at him for a long moment. She saw the bully who had tormented her. She saw the desperate man who had practiced alone in the dark. She saw her father, whose identity had been so wrapped up in his shooting that losing it would have destroyed him. She saw a man who needed help. Yes, she said, I will. The weeks that followed transformed Camp Coronado in ways no one could have predicted. Ren accepted a temporary assignment to remain on station, officially serving as a technical liaison between the XM 2047 development team and Naval Special Warfare Command. Unofficially, she became something far more valuable, a bridge between old methods and new technology, a living demonstration that excellence could evolve without being abandoned. She worked with Brannigan first, spending hours on the range helping him unlearn the habits that had sabotaged his shooting. It was not easy. Pride was a stubborn enemy, and 15 years of instinct did not surrender quietly. But slowly, session by session, she taught him to trust. Breathe with the rifle, she told him during one late afternoon practice. Feel the AI as a partner, not a competitor. It wants the same thing you want. A perfect shot. Let help you get there. Brannigan fired at the 1,500-meter target. The shot landed 3 inches left of center. Again, Ren said. He fired again. 2 inches left. You are still anticipating, she said. You feel the correction coming, and you try to beat it. Stop racing the machine. You will never win that race. Brannigan lowered the rifle and looked at her with an expression stripped of all pretense. How do you do it? He asked. How do you let go of everything you know? Ren considered the question. I had a teacher who understood that knowledge is not the enemy of learning, she said. My father never told me to forget what I knew. He told me to hold it loosely, to let new information reshape old understanding. The best shooters are not the ones with the most rigid techniques. They're the ones who can adapt. Brannigan nodded slowly. He raised a rifle again. The next shot hit center mass. By the end of the month, every sniper on the team had qualified on the XM 2047. The program was saved. Contracts were signed. Careers that had been days from ending were now secure and advancing. Captain Verity filed a report that would eventually reach the highest levels of Naval Special Warfare Command, describing what she had witnessed and recommending that Lieutenant Commander Holiday be recognized for her contribution. Ren declined the commendation. I did not do this for recognition, she told Verity in the captain's temporary office. I did it because it needed to be done. because hiding from who I am was not honoring my father. It was betraying the gift he gave me. Verity leaned back in her chair. What will you do now? You could transfer to a combat role. With your skills, any special operations unit would fight to have you. Rin shook her head. I am a logistics officer, she said. That is my career. That is the identity I built for myself. But I understand now that identity does not have to be singular. I could be a supply officer who also happens to be an exceptional shooter. I can honor my father's legacy without being consumed by it. She paused, a small smile crossing her face. Besides, someone needs to make sure these operators have enough ammunition to practice with. The paperwork does not file itself. Verity laughed, a warm sound that filled the small office. Your father was right about you, she said. You are something special, Lieutenant Commander. Do not ever let anyone make you forget that. On her final evening at Camp Coronado, Rin walked to the primary range alone. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. She carried no rifle. She needed no weapon. She simply wanted to stand in the place where everything had changed. Tanaka found her there, approaching with the hesitant respect of someone who understood they were intruding on a private moment. I wanted to thank you, he said, before you leave. You changed everything for us. For me. Rin turned to face him. You were already close, she said. You just needed permission to trust yourself. He nodded, then hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you hide it for so long? A gift like yours. Why would anyone want to bury that? Rin looked out at the distant targets, barely visible in the fading light. Because I thought being my father's daughter meant I could never be myself, she said. I thought his shadow was too large for me to ever step out of it. But I was wrong. His shadow was not a prison. It was a foundation, something to build on, not hide from. She turned back to Tanaka with a warmth that had not existed when she first arrived at this compound. Find your own foundation, she told him, and build something extraordinary on it. She left Camp Coronado the next morning, her audit complete, her temporary assignment concluded, her world forever changed. The operators lined up to see her off, a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks earlier. Brannigan shook her hand and held it for a long moment, words unnecessary between them. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to drop a comment and let us know what resonated with you. Maybe it was Rin's journey from invisible to undeniable. Maybe it was the moment Brannigan asked to be taught. Or maybe you have experienced something similar, a time when you revealed a part of yourself you had been hiding. Whatever it was, we would love to hear about it. As the transport vehicle carried Rin away from the compound, she looked back one last time at the range where she had reclaimed her heritage. The desert wind swept across the empty firing positions, carrying sand and silence and the echo of perfect shots. She pulled out her phone and dialed her mother. It is done, she said when the call connected. I did it, Mom. I finally did it. Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. Your father always knew you would, sweetheart. He never doubted. Not for a single moment. Rin smiled as the compound disappeared behind her. She was still a logistics officer. She was still Lieutenant Commander Ren Holiday, Supply Corps, clipboard carrier, paper pusher. But she was also Ghost's daughter. She was also one of the finest precision shooters the Navy had ever seen. She was finally, completely herself. And somewhere, she knew her father was watching. Proud as he had always been. Proud as she had finally learned to be.